think Ben's covered the first 2 slides, to be fair. But yeah, housekeeping arrangements, everyone knows where everything is there. So we're going to talk through the Doncaster freight collision derailment. So we'll start off with what happened, initial response, how we cleared the wreckage, asset reinstatement, back into use, and then some questions and answers.
So that will intro Ben cover that.
Yeah.
We can move on from that.
You did go a long time before 2004, Gareth.
I was trying to move to internet like that. It didn't exist before that, did it?
No, it didn't.
Rail track. So what happened? So on the morning of the 5th of July, 4 Echo 11 passed Delta 197 signal of danger on the down slow, up west slow at Loversall Junction, and 4 Echo 82 was stationary at the next signal, with the rear of the train approximately 230 metres beyond Delta 197. So once it passed that, there became an inevitability that it was going to go into the rear of that. So it crashed into the rear of that at 28 miles an hour, and it derailed 21 wagons and one Class 66 locomotive. So the cause of the crash is still under investigation. That hasn't been concluded yet. However, fatigue, no TPWS at Delta 197 signal, not required because it's a freight only route, along with signal sighting might all be contributing factors to why that occurred.
So initial response wise, works delivery got a call to respond to the collision. Very little information, other than several wagons had been derailed and they needed assistance in the recovery operation. So what did we find? 21 derailed wagons plus one Class 66 loco. Contents of all these containers littered all over the infrastructure. Significant damage to the infrastructure itself. Wagons also down an embankment. So this is up on an embankment right next to a triple SI site. So a massive challenge in itself, the location. And the Class 66 had actually reared up onto the back of a derailed wagon. So sort of precariously placed when we turned up. So initial call of, there's been a derailment turned into something huge that we weren't expecting when we arrived on site.
And then they called us, well, control ended up calling us because we ended up being a bit of the Swiss Army knife of the route, and issues like that will get us involved to help with the recovery operation. So whether it's derailment or derailment, that tends to be a sort of mechanism that control will go through at the fairly early stages or the route.
So challenges wise, we've pulled together a few, but ultimately we'll talk through these as we go. But welfare, obviously, sort of standing start on this, you suddenly got plus 50 people that are descending on that site. So quick response to set everything up to accept that many people.
It was fairly difficult welfare location just because of the geography and constraints of the site to try and get some welfare put into that area. Probably get a couple of cabins in quite easily, but putting something that was suitable for a longer term is quite challenging.
Weather, so this was July, just so happened to be probably one of the hottest Julys we've had for a long time. So initially reasonably warm, but I think in the end we ended up with temperatures over 30 degrees. Trying to look after people on site in that, there wasn't any welfare that could go directly next to the track. So we ended up sort of deploying fridges, sort of canopies, so people had protection from the sun directly on site. Yeah, it was definitely hot at times.
LSI, Cockpit Car Nature Reserve borders onto that, so for anyone who worked around that area, it's difficult. A lot of problems with the triple SI site, getting access into the triple SI site, constraints that brings, and also just the whole thing with the nature reserve, because it's just full of flies off the boggy terrain and stuff like that, which makes it an uncomfortable place to work, amongst other things really.
single line. So from a recovery point of view, you know, everything's slightly easier if you've got that whole road to bring stuff in and lift stuff off. But single line location, right outside flyover junction into Doncaster station. So that made difficult from a location point of view. Safety wise, you know, we're reacting to something here. We've not had time to plan everything that we're doing. So, you know, generally, you know, accidents happen when you're not sort of planning things. So safety was a big concern there. Plus, as I mentioned, the class 66 was sort of precariously balanced. You know, we didn't know initially when we started moving things what had happened, if anything had sort of slipped or moved.
Yeah, so we've got this whole thing of we don't really understand what the plan is. You're trying to pull a lot of people together and coordinate that. There's an awful lot of hours, about 25,000 hours used in that work, and didn't have an accident in that. And that's really a testament to the people who were there, but also a good bit of good luck amongst it, because that could change quite considerably the other way. But we do tend to find on something like this that sort of safe sites for whatever reason.
In the embankment, we've sort of touched on that. The difficulties of recovering things off a single line up there.
Overhead line constraints, so we're in an overhead line, that section track for overhead line above it. So that becomes another problem of how we deal with that. We get isolated and we get moved out of the way to try and lift anything. And because of the way the wagons were, etc., we couldn't even get a key off it to lift things without taking the overhead line down. And we've now got to dewire the site as well as trying to as part of the recovery, so you're taking it bits even more. And doing dewirements is difficult. And we've got to get with the balance weights, you've got to lift them up, you've got to then try and thread it through. Well, there's a train underneath and that's your access. So
materials, so getting everything to site once, especially once we moved into the track renewal point of view, but also as we'll go through for the lifts, we needed to construct some pretty large crane pads. So getting all the materials there was a challenge throughout the 4 weeks.
resources, just pulling together expertise. That's something that hasn't happened there before. We don't know what the plan is. People who can start to work around the clock and start to pull shifts in together. It's not going to work if you say, well, I'm going to take 3 weeks to try and plan this. And not only work one shift pattern because I haven't got any resource. The expectations is that you hit the ground running and you start moving it forward over time. And it becomes a lot of actual or perceived pressure about when's it going to get opened, what's the plan, what's the next step, etc., etc. And trying to get those resources isn't easy to get the right people. That's not a simple thing to just look in the yellow pages and fire up someone who's doing this.
The haulage aspect, so removing the wagons, we need to bring haulage in. Effectively, it's last minute. You know, locals from SEO, anyone who's worked on projects knows trying to plan haulage anyway. 52 weeks out is a challenge. Never mind, sort of, I need a train today. So that posed a problem, and again mentioned, you know, busy junctions around there. East Coast Main Line, trying to get blocks and train paths in and out. It's certainly an issue. Time becomes.
Yeah, time, so you get pressure over. When that happened day one, I got there, I think I got told just after 6. I was down on site for before 9, and then we start to have discussions about, well, how long is this going to take? I don't know, is the thing, and you then start guessing a little bit of a program, and we did guess a little bit of a program initially, and I think I doubled that within about a day. Once you start to get an idea of what it looks like, because we tend to think that the derailment, you start to hook the wagons up, re-rail them a day or 2, and then pull that out of the way. Probably not that much. There's not as big S&C there, so you haven't got that much damage to the train in a few days. Might be a week. But we reassess that fairly quickly after initial thoughts on it.
And then location, which feeds nicely into that. So the highlighted line was where it happened. So you've got Doncaster up there and down into Lowersall. And as you can see, the triple SI site there to the left. Yeah.
Just to sort of orientate, you've got, this is Bessacar level crossing. That's the only road access into the site, takes you down here. There's a large footbridge goes across the east coast, so that's east coast there. And this is the single line here. So as you single line goes up, all of this area here is the triple SI site, and both sides of it, but particularly this side, and then we come straight by the east coast to that side. To the south, you can't get out because you get into Rosington level crossing. Into the north, you can't get out because you go back onto the G&G line, that's going back into Doncaster there. So when the first call was about this, you had two thoughts really. One was, had I worked there? Because we didn't know what the point of the derailment was, and that's always the thing once you start to get somebody ring up to say there's been a derailment. And then the second thought was, I know that quite well, and that's probably as difficult a place as you can get. That's me sort of two thoughts on it really. Because you would, if that'd been on the east coast, it would have been simpler because it's twin track. And the access would have just been better. Because it was on the other side of the east coast, it just becomes a lot more difficult. If someone was right on time, we might be able to sing those.
So clearance of wreckage then. So by the time we sort of established what happened, like I said, welfare was the first thing. Set up a compound. Took us a couple of days to fully get it set up. As Gary mentioned, there's not a lot of room down there, but got something set up, parking, security and signing in. Something like this, you've always got people that want to come down and have a look and a nosy. And obviously the ORR were on site as well, so it means just keep everything secure. Isolation, so one of the first things, isolate everything. Everything's moved around, so the isolation team's fairly quick to respond to that. And then we started working from the Lowersall end of the job first. So the loco, which was crashed into the rear of, that was fine to remove itself from site. Several of the wagons just behind that loco have been derailed. So that was the first starting point. So Brough worked a couple of days there to get everything back on to a point that we could drag everything out down into Rosington and then get a train path off site. So after 2 days, we were at the point you can see on the photograph there. So we were pretty much a wagon away from the derailed loco. I think at that point, once we pulled that final sort of wagon away, the loco started creaking. Some massive exclusion zone set up around there. So we didn't know exactly what it was going to do next.
And those who worked with Brough, it's always an interesting thing to see how they go on. And we'll look at lift plans, about designs, and many things, technical works, and all that type of stuff. And they'll rock up with a few dozen 100-ton jacks and some beams and lots of chocks and bits of sleevers. And it's about knowledge. It's about how to put it together, what you can lift. And it's not in a position where you can start to design this out. You've been there for weeks trying to design this out. If you go back to theory, this is about expertise really. And I've worked with a few of the Brough guys who do this nationally. We derailed a RDT at Church Fenton, so I worked with them quite extensively with that, amongst another number of things. And it's good to see them work. And they're a good team, and they do go all over. And Ben mentioned before, I'm down south at the moment, so there's a derailment on High Speed 1 at the minute, some sidings at Dockyards, sidings, and the team who was there is down there. I've been talking to them and giving them a bit of support, and it's good. They're a good team.
Mm-hmm.
On to wreckage there, so we're now starting to think about how we're lifting these things that are bust up, and you can't just simply get re-railed, and you can't just jack into place. So one of the early calls we made on day one was to Volkers. So Volkers run they've got a couple of 1200s Kirovs, which is the big ones, UK biggest ones, 810 and some 250. So they're always a good company to pull in. And I know Volkers very well, deal with them an awful lot. and called them on the early days and just got them up to site to start thinking about what we're doing. Trying to get to key-offs that are free is never easy. So that ends up being something that you've got to negotiate. And in amongst this, we had to sort of stitch in some work that they were doing for TRU. So it was fortunate that was fairly local because these can be anywhere in the country. But we did release one of the key-offs to go and do a TRU job in amongst it to try and protect that because they'd been planning that for a long period of time. Then all of a sudden this happens and you pulled that in. So some of the stuff we're doing there, so Southend needed temporary works to make the track fit for the passenger machines. You see there, just due to the impact, it's slewed that track a little bit. And the north end, the key off needed to start pulling some of the wagons out, and it was also the local was on top of a wagon in a very precarious place. So all the wagons were removed by the 13th of July, 8 days after the collision occurred.
So they were all the ones that we could re-rail effectively, that could go out, engage and in traffic.
Yeah.
So stage 3 then, so this is when we moved into the sort of heavier lifts and got towards the sort of crash site itself. So as I mentioned earlier, all these containers were full of a multitude of different items. So popcorn became one of them. Those bags of popcorn were sort of in one of the containers, which was crushed and then needed everything sort of lifting out of it before the key rough guys had lifted it. So that was a lot of sort of, people power to get all them out. Obviously, bags of popcorn splitting everywhere. So I imagine there's
40 ton of popcorn in a 40-foot container that all needed hand falling out, and the container was partly down the bankside. You attach the key off to it. You saw if the previous spot, if you just flick back, see that there, it was just starting to crumple because it had damage. The rigidity of the container has not been back. So once you start to lift it, and even the self weight of it can just all start to crumble, it would just concertina up. And so I had to remove a lot of the goods out of there to allow for the lift.
Yeah,
So,
they're not designed to be lifted like that as sort of containers. Obviously, it's sort of designed central lift and move. So yeah, pretty much everything we were trying to lift like that was just collapsing in on itself. But yeah, so we did a lot of work to clear the wagons that were down the bank. In doing this, obviously, because it's on an embankment, these are fairly heavy lifts. Anyone who's worked with the key off, it needs somewhere to get its legs out. But because of the embankment, and we weren't sure how much damage everything that had gone down the embankment had sort of caused to the stability of the embankment, we needed to sort of erect some fairly sizable crane pads so that it sort of distributed the load through them and didn't sort of damage the integrity of the bank. So we took some time constructing these. We've brought in around about 2,000 ton of stone. Getting that in, as I said before, on a single line isn't easy. So we deployed, I think, three MFSs on nights through there, and then had a civils team working on days to sort of construct these crane pads.
and you've got to get that because it's sub-base. That sub-base isn't sort of standing stop out with any of the LDCs. So you've got to get the sub-base delivered to Doncaster first. Got to get that loaded with the MFS wagons. You've got to get the MFS wagons to site, then discharges, then start the work with it. So logistically, you just think it's, ring up and can have 2,000 tons amount. It doesn't quite work like that.
Yeah, so this was one of the, so as we said earlier, initially you think, a couple of weeks maybe to get all this sort of thing. This activity took quite a long time to sort of get everything there and build up them crane pads. So just some photographs there that you can see. So effectively, this is what we were trying to get to, a position where we could have something that was flat, distributed the load, so that the key rock could lift things off, especially with the tandem lifts. But it was also constructed properly, which took quite a lot of time. Plus, getting in those diggers and things like that, not easy enough to get in when you've not got an access point, which is easy enough to use. So yeah, we were sort of T+7 days once we started building these crane pads and thinking about how to lift things off the crash site. we ended up into about T plus 15 days.
If you look at that blue container there, that had heavy, that had construction tyres in that were about 8 foot diameter, hell of a weight, and you just couldn't handball them out, and I couldn't get anything in to try and get them out. So some of the containers we managed to, we tried lifting that, luckily that one lifted up without too much, but the doors were ripped off it because of the impact. The tyres had all moved forward and just banged the doors open. So some of the containers, although we got them on the wagons end of the van to go out as non-gauged loads, so we just took the possession and basically walked that back into Europort. They use on the phone, you know, just edging it by signals and stuff like that. If it fit, it fit. There was no other way of doing it really. Burn a little bit off here and there, but didn't quite work.
Yeah, and all the sort of contents of the wagons, obviously the freighting companies, you know, that's their property, but they've got customers that wanted all that sort of stuff back. So there was quite a lot of discussions on site of, you know, how long till we can sort of recover things, what could they recover, where could we get it to? So we did spend quite a bit of time trying to work out what we could recover for them, and what we just physically couldn't. They'd effectively have to write it off. But
6 o'clock now.
So yeah, so the clear up was the next thing. Once we sort of moved everything we physically could, there were certain items that we just weren't going to get off. So bogies there, so I had to bring in a couple of wagons just to get certain items off. Just continuously working our way towards the loco that was derailed.
Like 15 days in the 35 this point. So this became the loco lift. So put a lot of effort into that. Largest lift, that's 132 ton, that's a tandem lift. So largest lift that they've done by quite a substantial amount at that point in time. Just brought 2 key-offs in, rigged that up and lifted it. So we had to do 2 lifts. One, we had to build a pad to the side to lift it because this was on top of wagons. And then we need to recover the wagons that was underneath, then recover the loco back onto the track to get the loco out. You have to do that lift twice. And again, just the logistics of trying to get the cranes in the right position. We're on a single line, you've got live railway around the side here. It's a difficult challenge that just to try and get them into the position you want and get all of orientation. Anyone who's worked with key-offs, the key-off just doesn't turn up like that. There have been wagons, support wagons and various other things that you've got to try and work out where you put all of them in amongst the logistics of it. So we've got it lifted off to the side and lift it back on. And that was a relief. That was the hottest day of the year. That day that we lifted that, going back to my car, took my boots off, stood on the tarmac, and then burnt the soles of my feet. I think when I got in the car, it was 43 degrees. That day in Doncaster, it was horrific. The temperature.
Oh, I've got a video if it works.
So this is quite a good video I've got of so into the track renewal phase now. So it just becomes a conventional thing. Bit of single line NTC line lends itself to that. So that's Balfour PT2 NTC new track construction machine.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to stop.
Got them involved, and we'll just talk you through that when the able assistant plays the video.
I'm gonna have to stop sharing and reshare.
So yeah, a couple 100 meters of track to take out. There's a set of traps in amongst that, which were engineered traps out. So I had to get signal designed to take traps out rather than reinstating them. There weren't any use at that time, but just having been taken out as part of the any abandonment scheme. That was a good opportunity, so we took them out and just plain line the section. Get some good perspectives there with the logo and there's a set. stickers, simple things, comes along, set the tracks at the front end of it, pulls itself in, at the back end, it's just wagons and stickers, that's that little module that brings the stickers up, they just get dropped in and just popped in like that. To tidy up, we put the wire back in, etc. Get testing done, the stuff that was taken out. In amongst this, we did some stuff about vegetation clearance, some of the signals with the best vegetation wise, so got that done. Did some refurb on some of the overhead line, etc. Just taking some opportunity with resources, and that what we have on site. For those 24 days into it by that point, 5 days. And that's the big sort of numbers. So what we did on the site, just some highlights of the numbers. It's a heavy split, not enough to mention that. And this is what we did as a group, so we just end up with a WhatsApp group of updates through the thing. I've got
It's not quite as professional as the last
I
video
think so.
we've just showed.
I've just downloaded this off of the WhatsApp. This is all just stuff what they're about, it's something stuck on the group really. And it gives a good sort of chronological order of the job. the Kanye's not going to come for you for some Loris or whatever. You do. That's a quick timeline of the job. Quick timeline of the job there with the key events. So the 26 days to start to finish. Well, I got that handed back. So talked through most of them or all of them. I think. And that was a selection, not all by any count, but a selection of some of the sort of main players who helped with this, because you're not doing this by yourself. You're pulling in a lot of internal resource, a lot of external resource, a lot of supply chain is fairly short notice to do many different things.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So if I can ask Louise to keep an eye online. So if you are online and have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Any questions from people in the room? Andy?
Harry, was the MIAB involved in the initial derailment?
Yeah.
How long? What did you do to sort of preserve any evidence?
So
Cordon around it for the first couple of days. Or?
yeah, so RIAB will get involved with any derail. So they'll be advised initially of any derailment, and then depending on the severity, location, etc. of the derailment, they'll decide whether to just deploy to site. So they came to site initially. There was a RIO set up, standard thing. So MON will probably be one of your first response. People at the site, they'll act as the rail incident officer. So you RIO, and you don't start work for a period of time. So I think you're probably into about back end of day 2, maybe in day 3, before they get to the point where start to say, well, you're okay to start doing that.
Was the local driver injured or?
No, miraculously wasn't injured, which I think was a amazing thing when you look at it. It was lucky that the brakes on the train that he hit weren't on. It was just the brakes on the train that he hit was just waiting at a signal. So he was just sat with the local brakes on. If he put the whole train brakes on, that might have been a different thing. Plus, he rolled up the back of it and knocked the containers off. And if that had been a coal train or different types of commodities, that could have ended up not doing that and probably would have injured the driver. I think he was fortunate, the one who went into the back of it, very fortunate to do what he did.
Well, yeah, one thing they did want is that the front facing camera on the train apparently sort of backs up in like a black box, a bit like on an aeroplane. But that's on sort of the side of the loco where they needed to sort of get to it before it got erased. But we just physically couldn't. I don't know if they managed to get anything off it, but we physically just couldn't allow anyone sort of that close to it to get where they needed to be. So yeah.
Got a question and an answer on one.
What is the question and answer?
Question from Dave Merritt was, how much did it all cost? And Megan has already jumped in with the answer.
All right, okay.
And so I
was going to ask that, so sorry.
tell you the answer is
Don't worry about it. Quite a bit, to be fair. So I think that in total we're talking about 2 million, weren't they?
Just out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in total, it went to that type of expense.
So we took some of the sort of capex works and everything we did as the sort of track renewal, abandonment and the overhead line. We put that through as like capex works, but then obviously the over and above that got sort of offset from insurance, I guess.
And you've got to think like Kirov alone being 35 grand a shift for one of those Kirovs, or 70 grand a shift. So your costs will mount up significantly. 25,000 hours, put that into an hourly rate, stuff like that. So it does mount up very quickly. And overall, there's the damage to, so that's the damage to the infrastructure and the recovery, but then you've got the damage to the local, the damage to the train wagons. I think those train wagons, some of those were brand new, and I'm sure they were saying that they were 200 grand, and some of the wagons, and some of them were brand new. The Euro
Ecoflex, was it?
might have been fairly new, but there was a number of them that we ended up just burning up because we just couldn't get them out. And
If there were the eco effects, there was new 18 months ago.
the 200 grand a wagon, so there's quite a bit of additional cost onto that. Where that all ends up, I don't know, because you had a EWS and Freightliner collision.
Was there any environmental cleanup to be done?
Just the rubbish, really, that was the main thing. We siphoned off the fuel from the local, so it was a couple of 100 gallon of diesel came out the local, but ultimately the local's got engine oil and stuff like that, and so you couldn't clean everything off. We took the main stuff out that we thought might leak at some point.
And fuel tanks never ruptured or anything like that.
No,
So it all got pumped out into a 5,000 litre.
Yeah.
Bundle tank,
Yeah.
self-bundled tank.
Yeah, I think environmentally wise, we did well, and you could have looked at doing this job a couple of ways, really. You could have built a big haul road through and brought, so conventionally you would recover something like that using a road mounted crane.
As they did in Braid many years ago.
Yeah, or as it did in Carlisle recently with that derailment that they've done there. So you end up bringing a road mounted crane in. You could have done that and put trackway down or whatever and just cut through the nature reserve, but opted for the rail mounted thing, and that saved a lot of damage, really.
About security for in and around them trip, obviously Doncaster is not good.
Well, we've got
Yeah, we did get turned
got
off.
turned over quite a few times, like there was almost like the sucker punch of a dozen of them come down on quad bikes, because we had light set up the generator, so they just basically come down with the quad bikes. Unplug the lights, stick a couple of generators on the quad bike and be off, and you're just like, excellent. But you can't secure a big place like that. It's almost impossible. It becomes an inevitability that you're going to give them a few generators and stuff like that. But on the whole, we didn't get a
I was
lot.
saying, it wouldn't have took one for word to go around that.
Oh no,
There was containers there with potential.
Yeah.
Stuff that maybe sold. I would imagine.
so there was one of the containers had B&Q socket sets in, and just out of interest, the full container of that. And if you looked on eBay around that time, there was a huge influx of socket sets on eBay for like £10.
Everyone in works deliveries down there or something.
Yeah, well, initially they said that they wanted to keep all of the commodities, and then after maybe a week or something like that, the loss adjuster guy came out, and then he said anything that was opened, doesn't matter what the condition was, he was writing off. So then it was, can you scrap it all? After we'd spent a week trying to stop people taking socket sets off this job, to then start to say, can you scrap it all? Well, there you go. Can you take a couple of socket sets and put them in the bin somewhere?
I guess it's always great to see how the industry. Another question online.
Too much formation work with this sort of scarifying.
Just scarify it and just lay it straight on top.
Did those crane pads need to come out, or did they?
No, they're still there. Yeah, another derailment.
So we come together in a crisis, and we're great at responding. How do you take how we respond in a crisis and kind of maximise that in what we do day to day? That sometimes you look at something like this and you think we don't have to make life bureaucratic and more challenging than it needs to be. And there's a balance to be struck. But what are your thoughts on what do you take from this and apply day to day?
When you, sorry, just to interject as well, when you mentioned about it's always a safer site when it's an emergency, it's that intrinsic link, isn't it? Of like, it should be the worst site in the world, but actually it becomes a safer site. But we never really learn from that and take it away. Pretty much what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, your bigger sites tend to be safer sites for me. If I look at accidents, I tend not to have accidents on big sites. Now, whether that's got a lot of bias on it or whatever, I don't know, but your smaller sites tends to be the ones where you'll end up with a little bit of accident. with, and I think one of the things becomes familiarity. So when someone's been there for a number of days, whether it be the supervisor or the gang staff or something like that, they understand what they're doing and they get into a bit of a rhythm. Whereas if you're just turning up at somewhere new, you're more accident prone. I believe. But from a bottling point of view, Ben, yeah, I think, you know, you can do an awful lot when almost you haven't got the bureaucracy and you don't worry about, we need to get this signed off, we need to get that signed off, and kind of have a possession 12 weeks out, and you just, it's a great position to be in where you're just ringing up and it's happening. And yeah, I don't think it can work like that all the time, but I think there's a balance between where we are and like that. And I think on the whole, the works delivery team's got that mentality to be able to sort of work a little bit like that, and you can point and just say run and they'll run through the wall.
I mean, in amongst this as well, the weekend before we did the truck renewal reinstatement, we had 2 renewals on between the works delivery north teams. So we did Bridget Brotherton and an S&C renewal at Cliff House Leap. Also have been amongst the fact that a lot of us have been pulled onto this for a few weeks.
I think it was nice to see as well how everybody pulled it together and everybody worked together as a team from all the different companies, from like your Volkers to your freight operating companies, to your plant companies, to your labour suppliers. They were just left to get on with it, rather than somebody trying to chuck a spanner in works all the time. They were just like, that's your job, get on with it, you know what you're doing, and that's why it probably moved at a pace that it did.
And it does become hard. I mean, one of your hard things is, well, what we're doing. You know, what is the plan? And ultimately, I think people get a bit transfixed on, or like, can you tell us the whole plan? I don't know the whole plan, to be fair, but I know what I'm doing today, and today links till tomorrow, and that will link in, and we'll set that out. Whereas some of the time, everyone wants the infinite detail to tell us what I'm doing in 5 days' time at 6 o'clock at night. I don't know. Okay, we'll get you through this in chunks and just break the job down into chunks that become reasonable. Take some views of people who you trust or whatever, and then what can we do about this? They'll all come some problems and move that a bit further forward.
Got a couple of questions. So what was the material you used for your price?
Just GSB. I think it's just GSB at the end. We might have. Yeah, I think it's just granular subbase.
Right.
Yeah.
You achieved in this job 2 things that I failed to do. One whilst working high output using MFS, and one whilst I was TME. Of using the MFSs with a different material, because there's always the risk of belts getting clogged with a different type of material. And the second, the removal of the traps. So they were things that, as Ben said, the bureaucracy that we have in data. Is there any sort of learning that's come from that some of these decisions that I think sometimes people are fearful to say you can do something, because it might do something to the belts, it might have an impact. Is there anything, lessons learned about what you've done, any consequences? We see that sometimes when you do things in a rush, there are problems with the design. What have you done afterwards to sort of learn from that and almost make it the norm? Some of these points of
belts, the belts thing is probably a relevant thing, because if you left that subbase in too long, I think it'll all start compact, and then when you run the belt, you'd end up with a body of material that is running the belt and not actually taking it away. And we did consider that, but from a point of view of just loading it and then getting the train deployed and then going and emptying it, we felt that that was going to be fine. And it did end up being fine. I think we'll have a hiccup with the MFS failing, and if you get an MFS mid-flight, MFS wagons are fantastic bits of kit. You know, from that scenario, there isn't anything that I could work out how to try and get that volume of stone at that location, rather than just take more weeks, possibly with the road railer and some calm shells and a couple of boxes.
The old regular train, if that's still in service,
Doesn't exist. The self-discharging train was another good bit of kit. Yeah. So we used the MFSs and it worked well. And I think it worked well because we ended up with John Beckett in the woodyard, who's a go-to person, and they'll get stuff done. And you know, he's not a blocker in that type of scenario. So you end up with a few things lined up. And there was a guy, Mark Collins in Milton Keynes, who was the planner for SCO. It was just phenomenal. It would just ring every day, like, what do you want tomorrow? then he would literally make it happen. And that was really good. That's right up my street. I love that type of thing. Like ultimately where you can just go and it's happening like that. Really good. So that's your belt thing. And from the point of view of the design of the paper traps, it was the right thing to do without it. And we got NRDD just involved, like some art balls, something whatever, you just start to do a simplified design, and it's not that big a deal. They can deal with that. It's going to be a bigger deal trying to get new set traps. And then it's taken out and it's done. It was a sort of two-phase approach to doing the signalling, but nobody done it once, but once the first part is to get it open, then the second part to fully commission it. But again, how do you try and get that philosophy going? Because it's almost like project speed on steroids. Project speed squared or whatever. I don't know. Really.
I think a lot of this stuff as well was done in flight and getting initial designs and having rework stuff on site as well. So it wasn't like the design was done and that was it. Discovering stuff as we were on it as well. So a fast turnaround with the supply chain, turn people verify and stuff, that.
The civil stuff ended up getting signed off sort of retrospectively. Like you would never kind of do that, would you? Sign off it to AFC retrospectively, really. So yeah, there was a few sort of things that get lifted in the emergency, don't they?
So to add to the discussion that you is about the belts on the wind off concrete train ops unit I worked on. That had vibrating sides. These units that have eccentric weights and then the motor to vibrate. Because that was aggregates rather than ballast, sand and cement, sand and gravel. And these vibrating plates on the side of the hopper. That was specifically designed for aggregates.
To keep them moving.
Yes, to keep it moving.
Actually,
I think the weather was on the side as well if it had been wet. Not just for like what people in the first part of things for working was the banks. Just for the people wasn't. That would have been like problems of our but I think that even though the hot weather was a bad thing sometimes, it was probably a little bit less difficult, but that would be obvious.
Good stuff.
I can give some experience of the book team myself. I've worked with them in the past on the previous derailment, and echoing everything you say, how dynamic they are, and just like Lady Drillers with hard sleepers on the shoulders, putting it all together and works.
Or you look at it and go, your manual handling sort of risk assessment for that. Don't bother.
Well, my question was, was there any consideration of the network rail 72-ton cranes, given I was there in one place, or wasn't there, could be manual for the lifts or the cable-offs?
Which one, sorry?
The national recovery cranes, I think there were 3 still in service. I don't know if they're gone now.
Like the
Cowan Sheldon 72-ton.
general purpose thing.
No, the big the purpose rail recovery cranes.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything like that in use now.
I think they're all heritage railways now, and then
There were in use 8 years ago, 9 years ago.
There's listening to Google after the meeting, doesn't it?
Everything now, but mainly everything's done with road mounted crane. And you'll not always get a gear off to be able to do it, because if you look at something like Stonehaven, you're too far away, your distance away is from your road becomes too far.
Was you part of high up or where the derailment started? It means 2 72-ton cranes there to do. And the Pelican, when the Pelican went on its side.
I don't think they exist anymore.
No, that was 2 72-ton cranes moving up the Pelican.
Okay. Right.
One last question.
Last question, Andy. Go for it.
Did any of the popcorn get consumed?
Yes.
Was the thing. So some of them, I remember early days, some people took some bags of popcorn home, and one guy come in and never cooked popcorn before and said it was like the magic porridge pot. So basically heat some oil up and you need to put almost nothing in and it just goes like that. So he put a load in.
That's apparently racing pigeons like popcorn, so there's
Yeah.
people with pigeons that it's. So that-
So I think a 25 kilogram bag of popcorn will last a very long time. I think in pigeon world, it's lasted a
Probably
year,
longer.
coming up a year for some pigeon fanciers.
Excellent. Really great to hear how we pull together as an industry at short time scales, and particularly how you manage the logistics of a really challenging location. So if we can all say thank you in the usual way, that'd be great. So just for the benefit of those online people in the room, so the next dates are May the 18th in the Arcades office for satellite radar interferometry, June the 15th, Keighley Drawbridge, and then we're back in Doncaster on the 21st of September for challenging conventional approaches to line speed improvements. We'll see what Mr. Dennis has to say on that. So thank you for people in the room. Thank you to the reasonably high number of people, 20 odd online. If you're in the room and fancy a pint afterwards, we'll be going to the Draftsman on the station platform on the way back to York, there's no doubt. So you may see you there. If not, have a safe journey home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Speak that time, right?